I'd just like to quickly mention at the start of this video that I'm now on Patreon, where from $2 a month you can help support me create more content along the lines of this video. Your support would be greatly appreciated. To find out more, why not follow the links in the video description today and find out what exclusive perks you can receive. This is going to be quite a difficult video for me to record. This is all about the why and the how I moved to Japan. It's not a particularly short story, and I'll be splitting this story into at very least 2 parts. We'll just see how long they pan out. But this video is going to be the why I moved to Japan. It's going to be quite difficult, as I say. There's quite a lot of personal stuff in this. Not too personal that it's a bit too much. But it goes a little bit deeper than you may be expecting. So, the story has 2 strands to it, is the way I would look at it. The first one is why Japan, I suppose. Ever since my days of going to school and my geography lessons with Mr. Butt, I was fascinated by natural disasters and just generally the human environment. And I remember in 1995 or thereabouts, maybe 96, we were talking about the Great Hanshin earthquake of 95, which occurred in Kobe in the west of Japan. And I was absolutely enraptured by this story. We didn't just talk about the disaster itself, we talked about Japan and its culture, its society, and how it handled the effects of the earthquake and so forth. And this, combined with being a bit of a geek at the time, meant that there were a few things that were beginning to come together in my mind about why Japan was very interesting to me. In Super Play magazine, which was devoted to Super Nintendo, you could find out quite a bit of news about sort of the latest comings and goings in the anime and to a small extent in the manga world. This was something that you just didn't really find out about in the mid-90s in the UK. I noticed you subscribed to newsletters, of which I was still too young really to have the wherewithal to do so. There was very little exposure to sort of the anime and manga culture of Japan in the UK at that time. Maybe I was a little bit older, maybe if I was in my mid-teens, later teens, it might not have been so esoteric. But this certainly wasn't something that you was going to find by walking into your local bookstore or newsagent that readily. Certainly hiring a video, the best that you could hope for was finding Akira at your local video rental store, which is indeed what happened. And whilst Akira left amazing images seared into my imagination, it wasn't until a few years later that really the most important thing in terms of my fascination with Japan occurred. But we're going to come back to that. The second strand is the teaching aspect. This is something that goes back probably to the very late 90s, the very beginning of the new millennium. And I went to college, which is what we confusingly refer to as post-16 education in the UK in some parts of the country. And I went there with the idea that I might go into journalism. And this was something that I was very interested in. I've always loved writing. I still do like writing. And I probably had what can only be described as the shortest stint as a freelancer for Amiga Format that the magazine probably ever had. A whole 1 issue. Ben Vost took me on in the early part of 2000, firstly to write a Macintosh emulation feature for the magazine. they had recently given away the Fusion Macintosh emulator on a cover CD, and it seemed like the most appropriate time to recount the Macintosh emulation side of things, particularly as at that time I had an Amiga 1200 that was in a tower. It was really beefed up, and I was primarily using it as the Macintosh at the time. So it was a topic that I knew quite a bit about. And so I was very excited about this opportunity that I was going to at last freelance for a magazine that I really loved. And being a bit of a geek, this suited me down to the ground. This could have been my break into journalism, and who knows how that would have turned out. But it turns out that the very issue that my first feature was going to be featured in would also be the last, as the magazine was going to be closed down by its publisher, Future Publishing. I was pretty sad at this, but I didn't think that that was going to be the end for that particular avenue, but little did I know. And I attended the retrospective, if you will, afternoon that they held in Bath, and met Ben Voss and Nick Veach and many of the other staffers, as well as some of the other peeps that are involved in the Amiga scene, like Alan Redhouse, and steadily got very, very drunk over the course of the afternoon and early evening. And yeah, that was quite the day. And so began and ended my career in journalism. Sometime after that, I thought it would be interesting to look into the possibilities of teaching as a career. I don't honestly know why. I just thought it would be a good idea. And so at college there was this First Steps in Teaching course. And I went to my primary school, that's my elementary school, which I attended when I was between the ages of 6 through to 11. And it was amazing. I loved it. And so this set up basically the idea that I was going to go into teaching. But unfortunately, this is where our two strands begin to start to come together, because the strands on the teaching side were beginning to unravel because of personal reasons. Back to my fascination with Japan and manga and anime. In around 1998, I was in Otaka's bookstore in Barnstaple, and I used to go in there quite regularly when we went into town. I usually perused the comic books, computing books, and that was pretty much it really. Occasionally I might look at some of the travel books, mostly to look at the books on Japan, but it was mostly the computing and the cartoon book side of things, as it were. I just stumbled across this little volume, and unfortunately I don't have it with me, but it was Lamma 1/2. They had started printing the first volume and then the second volume in the UK, and I opened it up, and what I found inside was a story that spoke to me personally. And whilst we all know that Lamma is in no way in the same situation as I am, the story of how a boy with a curse who changed into a girl when splashed with cold water resonated with me on a very personal level, because from a very young age I had felt trapped in the role that I was being brought up as a boy. Inside I knew that I was a girl, I was female, and it's a very difficult story, and I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail on that side of things, but some of you may have seen the recent coming out video, shall we say, that I did, which I did in pixel art on the Amiga. And this was something that really spoke to me, and I devoured that first volume of Lamma 1/2, and then I found that they had the second volume. But the end of that second volume, it said the end. And for the longest while I was a bit confused, because it didn't seem like that was the ending, but I didn't know any better. I had no other way of knowing any better. This first foray into manga was the beginning and the end, shall we say, for quite a few years. And so I have always treasured Rumiko Takahashi's Lamma 1/2. I later found out, obviously, that there are in fact 38 volumes, and indeed there is an anime to go with it as well. And so basically that bond with Japan was cemented. Skip ahead a few years to when I was taking my First Steps in Teaching course. the threads on that side of things were really desperately beginning to unravel. I was 18 years old and I couldn't carry on as I was, grown up as I had been. I had to make a stand and make a change in my life. I came out to my parents in early 2002 at the age of 18, and so a whole other strand of my life began. And at the age of 19, having been seeking treatment from Dr. Russell Reed in London for about 3/4 of a year by then, I left home in September of 2002. And apart from a very short period of when I returned home recovering from surgery in mid-2005, I never returned home again. I moved out, and what I left with in my car was it. That was me. That was my new life. I stepped out that door, and from September 2002, it's me, Vicky. That's all I've ever been to the world. A chapter was closed on the past. And until the last couple of years, as I'm going to go through, I didn't ever talk about those few years beforehand, particularly the stuff to do with Amiga Format. I closed off the door. That past was not me. Now, I should say at this point I had the full support of my parents and family through the process of me essentially changing my life back then. But it was just decided that it was best for me not to return back to where I'd grown up since 1988. Things were different then, and my brothers were still at school. So that was that, I guess. But the idea of teaching didn't go as a result of that change. In fact, it stayed with me. Whilst I was at university in Brighton, I worked at an after-school club, out of school holidays play worker. And yeah, I loved it. It confirmed to me that teaching was definitely something I wanted to go into. And I eventually graduated, and various things happened in 2005, but essentially the days of becoming who I am now were completely done and dusted, shall we say. And I recovered perfectly fine eventually, and I moved back to Brighton. And it was in Sussex that I stayed until I moved to Japan, really. When I left university, I graduated, I got my degree, and but the most pressing thing to start with was to get a bit of income, to get a place, because I couldn't return back to where my parents were. And I got this crappy little bed sit for £60 a week, which may seem astonishing these days in Brighton. And basically I got a job. I worked for a local Apple store and earned reasonably good money, and until I got made redundant. Unfortunately, what proceeded after that was about 7 months of basic unemployment, a maxed out credit card, defaulting on debts, not that I had many, but still defaulted on them, and my credit record took a hammering. There was just no way that I could be equipped to do the postgraduate study required to go into teaching. And then really what happened was the next 11 or so years of my life, maybe a bit more, life just happened to me, really. In the meantime, I completed a photographic book, and I started my own business as a wedding photographer. I started out small, and within about 8 years or so, I was photographing weddings on the French Riviera, Lake Como in Italy, to name a few, working up in Scotland, Ireland. I was beginning to work all over. But unfortunately, for a great deal of the period of time whilst I was running my own business, I was also having to have my own day job. The upside to this is I did actually manage to get my deposit together for my own apartment, but it did mean by the end of 2017 that I was completely exhausted. I was basically suffering chronic exhaustion. I just had no energy, and this was the way it stayed for about 3 months. Something had snapped in my mind. I couldn't carry on doing what I had been doing. I didn't enjoy what I had been doing, which was web design. I sort of gradually fell into that role, I suppose. It was never really me. It was something I could turn my hand to, but it was never where I really wanted to be. And as I say, my mind just kind of collapsed a bit, really. I just had no energy to do anything. I physically was exhausted. My limbs were just completely without any life in them. And mentally, I had no capacity to do anything. Then one day, I found out about Nintendo's SNES Classic, or SNES Mini, or Super Nintendo Mini, I should say, really. And I thought, yeah, I have many happy memories of playing on a Super Nintendo. That's what I'm going to get. Comes with 20 odd games of it, all the ones that I love, plus all the ones that I ideally wanted to be able to play on a Super Nintendo, but didn't because they weren't released in the PAL territory, like Final Fantasy III and Chrono Trigger, for example. And I just loved it. And it opened up something in me that I had long neglected. That geeky part of me. That part of me that enjoyed the older consoles and computers and games and stuff, and doing pixel art. In late March of 2018, I was up in Scotland, thankfully having recovered some of my energy, and I was able to work again. And I was there primarily for a shoot for one of my couples. And it was there that I had been watching a few videos about how some people, mostly in their early 20s, had gone to Japan to teach English as a foreign language. And my mind began to dream about this possibility. And it was in a B&B that I remember very vividly one evening. I sat there till what must have been the wee hours of the morning, like maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, just watching videos after video about people who had done this and being excited by the possibility. One channel in particular that stood out was Chris Broad's Abroad in Japan. And I suddenly began to wonder, could I actually do this? And yes, even though I was about 35 at the time, I seriously began to think that this might be possible. But no, it couldn't be. It was definitely impossible. There was no way that somebody like myself could make that kind of change. So I just found myself gaming on my Nintendo DS and popping into East Kilbride CEX and picking up a few games. I think I even popped into Motherwell CEX. And I just kept on dismissing this idea as impossible. But it was when I went for a hike in the lowlands of Scotland in Dumfries in Galloway that I was in the Galloway Forest Park, and I decided to take a hike up a small mountain to where there was a loch. And I sat there with the wind blowing around me, and on the other side there were 2 people fishing. And I began to wonder about maybe I could start a YouTube channel. Maybe I could talk about my love of manga and anime and my love of retro gaming and pixel art and just illustration in general. Maybe I could do this. And I thought, yes, I could do this. This will be a way for me to reunite that past self of me that I dismissed as being nothing to do with me for so many years with the present. And I began to get very excited. I thought, if even though I can't come to Japan, and maybe my YouTube channel will be a bit of outlet from my day job, which I really didn't want to be doing. My mind was awash with ideas, just sat there. It was so exciting, and thinking about it now was so precious. I'm fortunate that I took a few videos and photos of that very day. And as I walked down from that little mountain sort of trapped loch, I was genuinely excited about the future. And whilst teaching in Japan definitely still seemed impossible, the YouTube channel sounded like a good idea. And that is what you're watching now. And something clicked in my mind. Teaching. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach. Was I teaching? No. I was just working all the hours that whatever it is that's up there could give me. And not only that, in Japan. And something just clicked in my mind that maybe there is a possibility in that. But it was impossible. How in the heck was I ever going to be able to do that? I probably wouldn't have the money, even though I had a bit of money saved away. I had my apartment. How on earth would I be able to afford to keep that on? Certainly renting it out would never cover everything. It was just impossible, a dream. But still, I kept on watching those videos on YouTube. And so I thought, what about that Amiga I have in the loft? That Amiga that I've had since the 90s. And so when I returned back from Scotland, I dug that Amiga out of the loft in early April. And wow, it worked still. And so I thought to myself, well, what do I need to do to make sure that this stays working? I found out, sent it off to Amiga Kit, and the rest of this is history. I started this YouTube channel, and I started doing Pixar tutorials, and I started talking about other topics as well. But still, the idea of moving to Japan was impossible. But something else was happening at the same time last year, or in 2018. I was sick and tired of doing my day job, of doing websites. And the problem is that because I was working for either small companies or for small organisations, they were virtually reliant on me as one individual to do everything in relation to website development. And things have changed a lot in the last 20 years with website complexity, and my skills have never been kept up to date with what was new. And employers didn't send me on training. I was gradually being de-skilled really. And as time went on, I was really trying to make my wedding photography business my main income, but sadly I could never get quite enough bookings to take it over that threshold to be able to live reasonably comfortably. But c'est la vie. So I began to get very frustrated with the day job. It just wasn't taking me anywhere I wanted to be in life, and I was dreaming all these ideas about maybe I could go and live and work in Japan, maybe I could go and teach for a bit, and maybe I could become an illustrator. One of the things I didn't mention about these strands that I've always loved drawing. It's been something that's just been something that I do. But I never ever really thought that I could make it as an illustrator. You'd never ever open a newspaper and find wanted illustrator, must start tomorrow, good wage. Just never existed. So it was never ever considered, as far as I was concerned, as a career. So I had all of these ideas of all of these things that I could be doing in my life, but I wasn't doing them. I was doing something that I didn't enjoy. I was working all the hours that I could get, and on top of that, I just wasn't really getting the necessary support in terms of other people around me taking on jobs to help out with the kind of work that was coming in, and I didn't have the skills to be able to do it with a great degree of confidence, and this began to create a very negative spiral. Anyway, so by mid-2019 things had come to a head at work. I had made it known that I couldn't take any more. I had been tasked with working on a particular e-commerce project which was multilingual in 8 languages, and I was well out of my depth. I couldn't handle it, and I just basically handed my notice in. I was convinced to stay on a little bit longer, or to stay on, but things continued on a downward trend until at one point last August I decided I have to make a change in my life. I cannot continue at the age that I was by then. So last August I would have been 36. I cannot continue down this path of seeing no real future in what I'm doing as a web developer. I didn't see myself as a web developer. I didn't want to be a web developer. I was trying my hardest to make it work and to ensure that I wasn't upsetting people. But no matter, I was never good enough for that role. And so I actually decided in August, or maybe even it was the end of July of last year, enough was enough. I was going to submit some applications to go and work in Japan. I worked out the finances, and whilst it was going to be very difficult, I reckoned it was going to be possible. I reckoned that I could go off to Japan and teach. I can do this. So I guess That's the why. Something had to give. I was bringing back parts of my past and reuniting them with the present. And realising that all those things that I let go of all those years ago, that I shunned because I thought they were connected to this person I never was, were all entirely me. But I had connected it to a certain sense of physicality that was immaterial, really. And so I took the step of deciding to wind down my wedding business and make a positive step that I could go and teach in Japan. And I could do that for a number of years. And whilst it will be difficult financially, and whilst there'll be so many difficulties in being able to actually practically be able to do it, I could do it, and I will do it, and I am doing it. So yes, that's the why. The next video will cover how. What actually happened to pull the trigger? What did I do to make this happen? And how can you, even if you're in your mid-30s, mid-40s, or maybe you're even in your mid-50s, you can make a change if you really want to in life. I guess it comes down to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Or maybe just a simple carpe diem. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for listening. I guess it all remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace. So it's come to that part of the video where I mention that I'm on Patreon. From as little as $2 a month, you can get early access to content, exclusive artwork free to post, your name mentioned on videos, as well as tips that I don't publish to the public. You can find a link in the video description below. Your subscription to my channel will also help me ensure that I can bring the latest content here from Japan.